לפנות בוקר חיל האוויר תקף מטרות משמעותיות של כוח קוץ האיראני בסוריה וגם של צבא סוריה. זאת המדיניות הברורה שאני מוביל מזה שנים. לא נאפשר התבססות איראנית צבאית נגדנו בסוריה, ולא נאפשר שום ניסיון של תקיפה נגדנו משטח סוריה. מי שמנסה לתקוף אותנו, מי שתוקף אותנו, דמו בראשו.
And greetings, everyone. Welcome to today's special live stream of the Watchman program, BICOG Media. My name is Peter Salemi, and I'm glad you could join us here today on this live stream. Well, of course, the Israelis attacked Iranian targets in Syria because apparently up in the Golan Heights there, the Syrians, who of course are backed by the Iranians, placed mines in the buffer zone between Israel and Syria. And of course they know that Israelis go there to patrol the area, so they put mines in there, hoping that they would kill Israeli soldiers. And of course Israel, they believe this is an act of war. And so they started hitting Iranian targets in Syria. And of course, they're doing this during the time where maybe, we're going to have to wait and see, but maybe Donald Trump will not be the next president of the United States. Of course, we're going through a lot of recounts in Georgia, lawsuits that are going on. People are forcing or are putting pressure on the election people, they're the courts, not to certify the election. We're seeing all this happening in the United States because obviously there is voter fraud. We are seeing the Dominion voting systems clearing out their offices and not showing up to meetings with government officials. And they're all lawyered up now on top of that. So there's obvious fraud going on. So we don't know the outcome of the election yet. You know, this office of President-elect Joe Biden, well, this office doesn't really exist. It's a false office. Doesn't exist. But we're seeing the mainstream media, Joe Biden and Democrats putting up this facade that Joe Biden is President-elect when nothing's been certified yet. And of course, Donald Trump hasn't conceded. But during this time, if there's this transition taking place from Trump to Biden, Donald Trump has got till January the 20th. And then after that, concedes and Joe Biden takes over the country. Now, I gave one scenario in the last broadcast saying that this prophecy of Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 45, this prophecy could be fulfilled from now till January 20th. Because I believe that, well, the King of the North is the President of the United States, and I believe this president, Donald Trump, is going to fulfill that prophecy of Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 45, which he has partially fulfilled already, where it says in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 45, let me just go to it right quickly. I didn't have it marked in my Bible. Let me just go to it quickly. All righty. Daniel 11:45, it says, he, that's the King of the North, the President of the United States, he who heads NATO, that great northern military alliance, he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace, that's military bases, military occupation, between the seas and in the glorious holy mountain. That's been partially fulfilled with the military base that has been set up there between in the Negev desert. Been set up there in 2017. I showed you the clip. If you want to watch our video on who is the King of the North, I show you the clip where the United States planted a military base in Israel for the first time ever. And, let's turn up the volume here. And, of course, they put an embassy in Jerusalem. And that, where it says he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace, can mean military bases, but it can also mean embassies. And of course, embassies have their military in the embassy as well. So it's been partially fulfilled. And then it says he shall come to his end and none shall help him. That's been partially fulfilled. As you see, people walking away from Trump, people stabbing Trump in the back. Fox News, the GOP, some of the GOPs, what they call the rhinos, the establishment Republicans like Christie and people like this, are pretty much stabbing Donald Trump in the back. So we're seeing partial fulfillments of this prophecy. And I said that one scenario could be that they count all the legal votes, they win through the courts, they take it to the House of the Representatives, Donald Trump gets reelected. Or we can see the full fulfillment of Daniel the 11th chapter, verse 45, from now till January 20th. That could be a possible scenario. Now, another possible scenario could be that it's Joe Biden, and Joe Biden fulfills that prophecy, but for some reason, I just don't see it. When you look at the biblical prophecies, you see this King of the North, his administration is pro-Christian, pro-Israel, and of course is an enemy of Iran, because it says tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him, and Joe Biden wants to restart the Iranian nuclear deal. So I just don't see Joe Biden fulfilling these prophecies, but, you know, God could surprise us. Maybe he'll harden Joe Biden's heart and he fulfills that prophecy to the full. But I personally believe that it's going to be Donald Trump that's going to fulfill this prophecy to the letter, which he has done partially. Where it says he shall come to his end and none shall help him is the end of NATO. And so I believe Donald Trump is going to fulfill this prophecy to the letter. But I believe it's Donald Trump. I don't see anybody else fulfilling this prophecy. Could be Joe Biden. God hardens his heart. We're going to have to wait and see. But I believe it's Donald Trump who's going to fulfill this prophecy. Now, as I just showed you that clip of Israelis going into Syria and targeting Iranian bases in Syria, because the Iranians want to establish themselves in Syria. And the reason why they want to do that is the same reason why they're established in Lebanon with their proxies there of Hezbollah. It's practically a military base in the northern border of Israel. There's only one reason why they want to do that, is because they want to attack their enemy, Israel. And Israel wants pretty much the Iranians out of Syria. And so, of course, the Israelis, after they put the mine there in the buffer zone between Israel and Syria in the Golan Heights there, and they put the mines there, the Israelis decided to go and strike Iranian targets in Syria. And, of course, Israelis believe this is an act of war. So already the war drums are starting to the war drums are starting already in the Middle East. And I want to show you this clip by this organization, a military organization. I want to show you this clip about exactly what is going on in Israel and Syria with Iran right now. Take a look at this clip.
The Israeli Air Force is once again bombing targets in Syria amid growing turbulence in the greater Middle East. Early on November the 18th, the Israeli Air Force conducted a series of strikes on targets in Syria. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, claimed that the strikes hit warehouses, command posts and military complexes, and batteries of surface-to-air missiles belonging to the Syrian army and the Iranian Quds Force. In total, the strikes reportedly hit 8 targets, including the following: an alleged Iranian military complex near Damascus International Airport, some mysterious secret military barracks which act as a housing complex for senior Iranian officials as well as visiting delegations, a command post for Division 7 of the Syrian army which allegedly cooperates with the Quds Force, surface-to-air missile launchers which had fired in the direction of the Israeli jets during the strikes. The Israeli side claimed that the strikes came in response to the placement of explosive charges near the contact line between the Israeli-controlled part of the Golan Heights and Syrian-controlled territory. According to IDF spokesman Brigadier General Hirai Zilberman, the anti-personnel mines discovered on November the 17th were actually planted several weeks before by local Syrians under the command of Iranian Quds Force. "We have long been prepared for the possibility of terror attacks in the northern sector," Defense Minister Benny Gantz said, commenting on the attack. "The IDF has the capabilities and the determination to respond severely to any incident, both on the Lebanese and the Syrian fronts. I say clearly, Syria is responsible for what occurs on its territory." In their turn, the Syrian state media reported that the Syrian military had activated its air defense forces in response to the Israeli aggression, claiming that a number of missiles were intercepted. According to the Syrian Ministry of Defense, 3 service members were killed and another one was injured as a result of the strikes. Sources loyal to Israel and militant groups operating in Syria claim that at least 10 Iranian-backed fighters were killed. Israel justifies its recent attack on Syria with the need to respond to Iranian-backed terror plots. A more realistic version would be that Tel Aviv, concerned by the reported loss of Donald Trump in the US presidential election, has been trying to exploit the potential last months of the Trump administration's unconditional support to deliver as much damage as possible to its regional opponents. Meanwhile, according to reports in US mainstream media, Mr. Donald Trump, well known for his hardcore pro-Israeli stance, is now even considering a plan of strikes on Iranian nuclear objects before he possibly leaves office. Trump reportedly requested his top aides to provide him with options for attacking Iran's main nuclear site, Natanz, as Iran continues to increase its stockpile of low-enriched uranium as a part of its gradual withdrawal from the 2015 nuclear deal, which the Trump administration had itself destroyed by unilaterally withdrawing from it. The main options, according to reports, are, as always, an old-school cruise missile strike or a massive cyber attack. The Iranian leadership has already promised a crushing response to any kind of aggression, and there can be little doubt that Iran, which already has the experience of shooting down US military drones over the Persian Gulf and launching ballistic missiles at US bases in Iraq, would turn its promises into reality. Especially if Mr. Trump is not able to challenge the outcome of the presidential election successfully in court and is forced to accept his loss, it does not look like the last months of the Trump administration are going to be marked by any kind of calm on the international scene.
All right, so that's a clip from that source there saying that if Donald Trump cannot prove that there was election fraud and he has to concede, he's going to go out with a bang. It's not going to be a calm transition. And he's targeting Iran because Joe Biden, he wants to restart the Iranian nuclear deal that the United States pulled out because of Donald Trump. And in this article, it says here that Iran's nuclear facilities are not only still standing, they have grown in quality and quantity. This is important to keep in mind amid speculation once again during a presidential lame duck period. That is, in his last few weeks in office, Donald Trump will either order U.S. military action against Iran or give Israel a green light as well as some assistance to do it on its own. So either the United States does it or Israel does it. And then it says here that there was an interview with H.R. McMaster, Trump's former national security advisor. He gave Fox News on Wednesday in which he raised the possibility that Israel, fearful of President-elect Joe Biden's Iran policies, would attack Iran in the twilight of Trump's term in office. Because they know Trump is pro-Israel, and he will allow Israel to attack Iran. And, of course, the Israelis just attacked Syria, Iranian targets in Syria. So they know, Israel knows they can get away with it because they got the full backing of the United States. Now, did you know, and this is buried in the news, just like these Israeli attacks in Syria are buried in the news. You don't see them in the news cycle. Did you know that just recently Donald Trump wanted to attack Iran, but he got talked out of it? Take a look at this clip by Fox.
New York Times is reporting President Donald Trump asked aides about an offensive strike against Iran last week. According to the paper, he expressed interest in targeting Iran's primary nuclear site during a meeting last Thursday. The International Atomic Energy Agency had reported the previous day Iran's stockpiles of uranium have reached 12 times the 300-kilogram limit set by the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That's the nuclear deal the U.S. exited in 2018. Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and military leaders reportedly convinced the president not to pursue this military strike.
All right, so he didn't pursue the military strike, but he was going to, and he'll probably let Israel do it if Israel has if they want to attack Iran for, of course, obvious reasons, they can. And if you understand that Israel goes by the Begin doctrine, which means that they will not accept a hostile state having, of course, nuclear weapons to attack Israel. They follow that Begin doctrine, named after their former prime minister, that if they feel that there's a hostile state threatening them and they have nuclear weapons, well, then the Israelis can go. They can go and they can bomb that country all they want, and no one can stop them. So there's a potential for war in these final days of Trump's administration. As I said in the last broadcast, Donald Trump, from now till then, could fulfill this prophecy of Daniel the 11th chapter, verse 45, to the letter, where it says that he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and in the glorious holy mountain, which has been partially been fulfilled. And he does it because of, verse 44, tidings out of the east and out of the north, which is Iran. And I urge you to read our booklet, Middle Eastern Prophecy, for full details on that. We show you that tidings out of the east and out of the north mean Old Persia and Media, which is Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. And what happens if the United States attacks Iran? Well, we know that Iran is part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is what they basically call the NATO of the East. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is led by China. So if you attack Iran, you're attacking an ally of China. And we know in Numbers, the 24th chapter, verse 24, it says, ships shall come from the coast of Kittim and shall afflict Asher and shall afflict Eber, which is, of course, NATO and the EU. And that's the deadly blow that's going to break NATO apart. And it says he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Jeremiah, the 30th chapter, verse 14, says that all your allies have forgotten you. They seek you not. It's the same prophecy. So China is going to deliver that deadly blow to the NATO alliance, and NATO's going to break apart. It's going to shatter apart. And here we see war starting to ramp up in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. The United States, either they get involved with and strike Iran before the president leaves office, or they'll let the Israelis do it. And of course, the United States is going to help them. Now, the Bible prophecies say that Judah is going to be broken. Now, they're pretty much surrounded on all sides. They got Hezbollah in the northern part there in Lebanon, and it's pretty much a big military base there in their northern border, the southern border of Lebanon, the northern border of Israel. It's pretty much a military base. Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. Iran wants to establish the same thing in Syria. They're pretty much surrounded. Now they're starting to attack Iranian targets in Syria. Now is Iran going to start to attack Israel to the point where Israel needs help? And that's when, and they, of course, suffer severe casualties to the point where the United States has to come in and occupy Judah. Because biblical prophecies show that Israel the House of Israel, the United States and British Commonwealth in the British Commonwealth, the House of Israel, they are going to occupy Judah. NATO is going to occupy Judah. And it says, when we see that, it says, he shall come to his end and none shall help him. The end of NATO. When we see NATO occupy Israel, NATO is going to break apart. Are they going to attack Iran? Iran is an ally of China. Is that going to prompt China to come out? The ship shall come from the coast of Kittim and shall afflict Asher and Eber. And then NATO receives that deadly blow and NATO breaks apart. Is this where we're heading to right now in these next few weeks? Now, also, if you notice that clip, a lot of these attacks were taking place in and around Damascus. And I want to show you this prophecy. In Isaiah, the 17th chapter, here it talks about the burden of Damascus. Now, before that, in chapter 16, verses 13 and 14, it talks about the war in Moab and how Moab will be destroyed. Now, Moab is of course, Syria. And then it has a separate prophecy of Damascus, the capital of Syria. And this, of course, was already fulfilled between 2013 and 2016 in the whole war that just devastated that whole country. And then it talks about Damascus, a separate prophecy for Damascus. Damascus is still standing, but there's a prophecy here in Isaiah, the 17th chapter, verse 1, that talks about Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. So Damascus is going to be destroyed. And who's going to destroy Damascus? Well, there's a prophecy here in Zechariah 9:1. And here it talks about the burden of the word of the Eternal in the land of Hadrach. Now, that land of Hadrach we show you in the booklet Syria in Prophecy, and the links are on the YouTube window there if you want to take a look at those booklets. Absolutely free of charge. We show you in that booklet Syria in Prophecy that Hadrach is Iran. And if you notice, the burden of the word of the Eternal in the land of Hadrach, and Damascus shall be the rest thereof, meaning God's wrath is going to rest on Damascus. And as we can see, Iran and Damascus are, of course, in league together, as we see right now in Syria. And it says that God's wrath is going to rest on Damascus. Now, when God's wrath is resting on a nation, who does he use to bring about justice and judgment on that nation he is wrathful against? Well, he uses Israel. As it says here in Jeremiah, the 51st chapter, verse 19, the portion of Jacob is not like them, for he is the former of all things, and Israel is the rod of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. Thou art, God saying this about Israel, thou art my battle axe and weapons of war. For with thee will I break in pieces the nations, and with thee will I destroy kingdoms. And with thee will I break in pieces the horse and his rider, and with thee will I break in pieces the chariot and his rider. And I will break in pieces, verse 22, man and woman, and with thee will I break in pieces old and young, and with thee will I break in pieces the young man and the maid. I will break in pieces with thee the shepherd and his flock, and with thee will I break in pieces the husbandman and his yoke of oxen, and with thee will I break in pieces captains and rulers. So God uses Israel, and God's wrath is on Damascus, and he's going to use Israel to destroy Damascus. And it came close on November the 18th. And Donald Trump is seriously thinking about attacking Iran or Syria, because that's where Iran is. Maybe they'll just target on Syria, because, of course, Iran is deeply entrenched in Syria. So they'll hurt them that way and eventually destroy Damascus. It says Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. Now, when that happens, notice verse 3. It says, the fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Eternal of hosts. Notice what it says there. When Damascus is ruined, it says, the fortress shall also cease from Ephraim. Now, if you look at that Hebrew word in the Strong's 4013, it means a fortification, a castle, a fortified city, figuratively, a defender. And that's exactly what NATO is. NATO is a defender. NATO was set up to defend Europe from the communist bloc there in the east. And here we see, it says here that the fortress, the defender, shall also cease from Ephraim. Ephraim, of course, is Britain, and of course a major leader of NATO. The leader is the United States, but Britain, of course, is a partner in NATO as well. So this defender shall also cease from Ephraim, meaning the fall of NATO. So when Damascus is ruined, which is, of course, when you look at biblical prophecy, Israel is going to ruin Damascus, either the United States and Israel together, or the Israelis, or the United States alone. When Damascus is ruined, then NATO is going to break apart. So, are they going to attack Iranian sites in Syria? And Iran is going to retaliate? And Judah is going to be broken to the point where NATO has to come in and occupy Judah? They already have a military base, the United States, in Judah. They already have a military base. Are they going to build more? Now, that military base is between the seas. It's between the seas and the Negev Desert, but it can also mean northern Israel, where you got the Sea of Galilee and the Mediterranean Sea. And obviously, there's trouble in that northern border. Will the United States plant a military base in that northern border to save Judah? And of course, we have the embassy in Jerusalem. It says here, after Damascus is destroyed, then the end of NATO comes. And then it says, notice, in that day it shall come to pass, verse 4, that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall be lean, meaning that the nations of Israel are going to rot from the inside out. And look at what's happening today with COVID, the COVID-19 virus. They've shut the economies down. People are losing their jobs. People are losing their businesses. People are committing suicide. Families are breaking up. People are going bankrupt. And it's exactly what it says here in this prophecy, that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean. That the nations of Israel are rotting from the inside out. And that's exactly what's happening with all these lockdowns that are going on, especially by Democrats in the Democrat cities. Look at Detroit is an absolute disaster. New York is an absolute disaster. The economy's gone. It is an empty city. People are leaving, especially the rich. They're leaving the state. They're moving down to Florida. California, same thing. People are leaving that state, moving to Texas. Israel is becoming thinner and waxing lean, as the Bible says, economically, socially, and eventually militarily. So here we see that the fortress, or the defender, also shall cease when Damascus is ruined. It shall cease from Ephraim. That's one of the nations of NATO. So here another prophecy showing us that NATO is going to break apart. Isaiah the 19th chapter, verse 17. Here it shows you that NATO is going to occupy Judah. Again, it says Isaiah 19:17, and the land of Judah shall be a terror unto Egypt. Now, when you look at the Farrar Fenton translation of the Bible, it should read, the land of Judah. In the land of Judah, you'll see a procession of troop deployments in the land of Judah. And it says, everyone that maketh mention thereof shall be afraid in himself, because of the counsel of the Eternal of hosts, which he hath determined against it. So here we see in the land of Judah a procession of troops that is going to take place. And of course, in our booklet, Egypt and Prophecy, we go into that in great detail to show you that that is NATO occupying Judah. And as I keep insisting, when we see that, then you will see, when NATO occupies Judah, when we see that, then you will see NATO break apart, the EU break apart, and China is going to deliver that deadly blow to them. And to bring China into this, they're going to have to attack Iran. And Iran is part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So if you attack Iran, you're going to attack one of China's allies. And China is going to step up and give that deadly blow to NATO. And NATO is going to break apart. So here we see, just recently, happened November 18th, barely in the news, the Israelis striking Iranian targets in Syria. And things are starting to really ramp up in the Middle East. So I urge you to read our booklets, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, The Middle East in Prophecy, and Syria in Prophecy. And you get all these prophecies in great detail in those booklets, and you can download them off our website, britishisrael.ca, and you can download them absolutely free of charge. Thank you, everybody, for joining me here on today's live stream, and I'll see you here real soon.